morning. My name is Jennifer Wistran, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Kennan Institute. Thank you for joining us for a discussion of centering the North Caucasus in Russian affairs. Before I introduce our guests, I'd like to remind you that you can stay up to date on the Kennan Institute's activities by visiting the Kennan Institute's website and subscribing to our blogs and podcasts and other publications. Today's guests are Dr. Jean-François Rattel, Dr. Murat Ilyasov, and soon-to-be Dr. Christine Lejeune. Dr. Jean-François Rattel is a professor of complex studies and human rights, the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Ottawa. His research interests include violent extremism, insurgencies, and foreign fighters in Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. He's conducted extensive field research in the North Caucasus and the Balkans, as well as among North Caucasus diasporas in Europe. He's published many peer-reviewed articles and co-edited a volume entitled Networked Insurgencies and Foreign Fighters in Eurasia. Dr. Murat Ilyasov is a Chechen scholar who specializes in the Caucasus. His research examines authoritarianism and radicalization, as well as the dynamics of war and peace in both the North and the South Caucasus. Dr. Ilyasov is currently a visiting scholar at George Washington University. Prior to this appointment, he was a visiting assistant professor at Miami University. In addition to his academic work, Dr. Ilyasov has conducted work in the non-governmental sector, promoting peace and democracy in the Caucasus. Christine Lejeune is a PhD candidate in sociocultural anthropology at the University of Florida. Her research focuses on the social and environmental dynamics of state-led and locally initiated development projects in the mountainous areas of Karachay-Cherkess Republic in the North Caucasus. She has an MA from Georgetown University, an MA from the Free University of Berlin, and a BA from Mount Holyoke College. After our guests speak, and as with our previous webinar discussions, we're going to do about a 30-minute Q&A with the three speakers. Then we're going to move to a question and answer period with the audience. If you would like to ask a question, please submit your question via the Q&A function on Zoom. And please remember to include your name and affiliation when doing so. And you should feel free to submit these questions at any point during the first half of the discussion, and then we will get to them in the second half. And finally, today's discussion is being recorded. So Jean-François, I'm going to start. My first question is going to be for you. So a good part of your scholarly work has focused on violent extremism and foreign fighters. Could you please tell us how the North Caucasus is involved in Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, and how that involvement is impacting the region, i.e. the North Caucasus, both demographically and socioeconomically?
I think it's important to understand that the war in Ukraine has a huge impact on the North Caucasus from a Ukrainian perspective, but also from a regional perspective. On the Ukraine side, many people from the North Caucasus have joined the fight against the Russian aggression. We have seen groups, Chechen groups, Ingush, Dagestani groups forming battalions to advocate for political changes in the North Caucasus from Ukraine, and also to develop military means against Russian imperialism and fighting along Ukraine. So it's difficult to assess how many people from the North Caucasus, but Ukraine has become really a safe haven where political activists, fighters are connecting with each other and creating opportunities to work reforms and engage changes within the Russian Federation, working from Ukraine. And also the Ukrainian government have supported those groups very actively. Chechens appears to be the leading force against Russian forces in Ukraine, but you also have many other groups that are joining the fight. And what is very unique is the fact that previously we would not see that cross-fertilization between groups where ideas of what would be next in the fight against Russia as, in a way, a stepping stone in Ukraine. At the same time, the war in Ukraine also deeply affects the North Caucasus political relationship. The Kadyrov regime has changed the way it approaches its relationship with the federal center, have launched new units and recruitment center. Chechnya has become a hub of mobilizing Chechens, but also Russian in general to fight in Ukraine. That means a different way of mobilizing people for short-term military contract. It gave much more power to the Kadyrov administration over political relationship with the federal center. And at the same time, North Caucasian people have been discriminately casualties of wars in the war in Ukraine. As the BBC and other research have shown, ethnic groups, and particularly in the North Caucasus, Dagestanis, Chechen, Ingush, Ossets, have been forcefully mobilized or have mobilized for economical reason into the war. So the war in Ukraine is changing the political landscape within pro-Moscow forces, but also in forces that will seek to topple the influence of regime like the Kadyrov regime in Chechnya. It's also changing drastically the socio-political and sociological landscape of the future of the North Caucasus, affecting birth rate, affecting the population. Traumatized people from the war will come back to the North Caucasus with very little support. And this is in a way a recipe for major social changes. We'll discuss more later with Marat and Christine, but the war in Ukraine is really launching different phases of political changes and decolonization within the North Caucasus from Ukraine, but from within, where people are much more open to oppose mobilization, to oppose how the Russian government and North Caucasian elites are framing the war and framing the relationship with Ukraine and the peripheries.
Thank you, Jean-François. That is, it is fascinating, and I'm glad you mentioned we're going to pick up on some of these points later. I mean, I've written down, just what you started with Safe Haven for work amongst or cross-fertilization amongst the groups. A few people would think that that would be like a byproduct of having fighters sent over to fight in Ukraine. So you mentioned so many wonderful points. Thank you. And with that, we'll hold, circling back to those. And I want to move to a question from Marat. Discussions about the Caucasus tend to focus on the South Caucasus disproportionately, right? When people use the word Caucasus, they tend to refer to the South Caucasus. Could you please tell our audience members why the North Caucasus merits separate attention and sometimes even special attention, which frankly builds on the points that Jean-François just mentioned, but why does that area deserve a special attention?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, to a large extent, Jean-François just covered the answer to this question, but I want our audience to think also about back in history, just after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when Chechnya, to a large extent, shaped domestic and foreign Russian politics, and that was it's one of the reasons why analysts, why experts, why just curious people should look at the North Caucasus, because they learn what Russia can do, what Russia is trying to do, what are the attitudes in terms of domestic politics. For example, all the not all, but a lot of legislation, including the laws on extremism, on terrorism, including laws on that regulate the relationship between the state and religion, they were all shaped by the Russo-Chechen War. So if not for that war, probably Russia maybe would not move towards authoritarianism. And if not for that war, we would not probably have Ukraine today, because in its foreign politics, Russia learned to what extent it can bend international law, to what extent it can go like crossing the red lines. Maybe it wasn't red lines before. What will be tolerated by the West, and this is all Chechen war. And today, if we think about North Caucasus, the majority of the population are Muslims there, and this is, it's not by default a problem, but having in mind Islamic radicalization, having in mind recent experience of Islamic State and participation of the North Caucasian in it. So having in mind all these factors, it is worth paying attention to the whole region, having in mind experience not only of the Chechen wars, but also the spillover that happened of the Chechen wars and that affected neighboring republics. And if we think about the challenges that Russia experiences on political level, not on like socio-economic level, also related to political, but the direct political challenges, they pretty much all are coming from the North Caucasus. So that's why I think North Caucasus deserves special attention.
Thank you, Murat. And again, I think we can circle back to that. I can see already we're going to have a number of audience members asking you to delimit like the specific, because that was great that you mentioned that the challenge is coming from that region. I want to turn to Christine and ask you a question. Based on your research on the development of tourism in the North Caucasus, how would you describe the region's overall economic picture? We've had Jean-Francois and Murat talking about the political and other instability. So turning now to economics, how would you talk about the economic picture? Is the nascent tourism industry enabling the North Caucasus to become more economically independent, or is it still highly dependent on Moscow, or we could even argue elsewhere, for support?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. So yes, I would argue that still, the North Caucasus is heavily dependent on Moscow for in its tourism development endeavors. Tourism development in the North Caucasus, and as you see in Russia in general, has always mostly been top down, as opposed to tourism development elsewhere, as you may see in different countries, and also in the Alps in Western Europe, for example. Although France has also had a similarly top-down development, if I'm looking at mountain tourism development. But you do have the most recent kind of buildup of tourism development, with an economic underpinning of infusing, money into the North Caucasus starting in 2010. But that was largely led by the Russian state. The Russian state has a joint stock company, Northern Caucasus Resorts, Kuroty Severna Kavkaza, that is leading the largest kind of tourism development projects, most notably in Arkhis, in Karachay-Cherkessia, in Elbrus, which is around in Kabardino-Balkaria, and also Veduchi, Chechnya. So these are very large, very large state-run development projects. And if you go there, you can just see the massive infrastructure that is being developed. Now, of course, you do also see local smaller businesses benefiting from this. Locals are taking advantage of increased tourist flows to these regions. But of course, it's generally, in particular, local political and economic elites who are already in positions to take advantage of these opportunities. So you do see local political elites being the ones who are already benefiting most, in the ownership of hotels or other infrastructure. And now also with travel since February 2022, with travel to Western, and I'm talking specifically here about the type of tourism that is mountain, ski resort, alpine tourism is attracted, tourists to the North Caucasus. You do see, that travel to Western ski, European ski resorts limited. So now you do have a more captive tourism audience within Russian borders. So you do see a larger push to invest in North Caucasus, in the North Caucasus as a tourism location, also coming from Moscow businessmen as well. So that is a bit of a fear among small local tourism operators who are of the Muslim and have been operating more family-run businesses, guest houses, their own little complexes. You are seeing now kind of an influx of Moscow business coming to that region where they're building larger hotels, almost skyscraper-esque of multiple stories high. So there is a new sort of inflow there. The small operators also need to kind of tread lightly because priority is given to the state development, and then also those who already have the kind of ties to Moscow, the economic and political ties to Moscow, who've been mainly profiting. And then also I would note that there is an emphasis by the Russian state on tourism infrastructure development, so this heavy use building of infrastructure, and originally there was the focus on attracting foreign tourists, so there was this look to abroad to say, hey, our opportunities here are equally as enticing as going to the Alps or elsewhere in mountainous regions. But of course now since February 2022 that has dropped off, and you do see that the focus is now increasingly on attracting the Russian, capturing that Russian tourism interest in the region when it comes to skiing and alpine tourism.
Thank you, Christine. This is just fascinating and breaking from convention. I'm actually just going to ask you a follow-up question before I circle back to Jean-Francois. But so do you think it'd be accurate to characterize that there is kind of this tension between the top down, which is coming from Moscow, versus kind of local development and kind of courting a Russian audience versus kind of looking at, is there kind of this very complex series of dichotomies going on?
Yes, I would say that's accurate. There is, of course, the power lies mostly within the state, operations and also those with ties to Moscow. But yes, I would say that, it's not something that's spoken or discussed, but when you are there, the present, observing these tourism operators, that is a concern that they do have. And so there is a tension in that regard that, they may be pushed out of the market, by now this greater interest. And yes, that's certainly accurate. You also do see, locals, especially families who are attempting to build or maintain their hotels or other infrastructure, restaurants, it's very precarious. So often they will have, family members are helping to personally build these hotels in a very bottom-up manner. But of course, lack of financing or opportunities sometimes, cause these to fail. So you also have a very, in a financial and economic tension there, where, those who are coming from Moscow or with these ties just have much more financial power and ability in contrast to local operators.
No, thank you. No, this is fascinating because again, this is a domain in which we tend not to see kind of these kind of internal tensions playing out. So I appreciate you bringing this up. I want to circle back now to Jean-Francois, but first I do want to encourage our audience members to send in your questions, please. Any questions you have related to what's been discussed, or there are things that have not been discussed that you'd like our audience members to ask. We will do another round of questions with our guests, and then probably in about 15 minutes open up for audience questions. So Jean-Francois, I want to circle back with you to a word you did bring up in your first set of remarks that I know sparks a lot of reactions from people. So the word decolonization. So you mentioned, decolonization has become a frequent topic of discussion among academics who study the former Soviet republics, especially since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. What does this term decolonization mean, specifically from the perspective of the North Caucasus? Because I think, again, we tend to assume there's one meaning of it, and we know, right, people internalize it and utilize it different ways. So if you can, in any way you want to look at it, maybe generally, but also specifically from the North Caucasus.
I think the first thing is addressing the elephant in the room in a way through decolonization. There is certainly, as we were discussing with regard to Ukraine, there is a push from activists to support the idea of breaking down the Russian Federation and addressing the neo-imperial structure of the Russian Federation. It appears a lot in the activity of the Civic Council in Ukraine, as well as the Forum of Free People of Post-Russia, where the discussion is about really, for the North Caucasus, the full independence of the region, whether breakdown in small political entities, broadly speaking, around the existing republics that we have in the North Caucasus, but also discussion about the idea of a confederation of different ethnicities and national groups in the North Caucasus. The idea is really, in a way, to challenge Moscow grip and imperial control on the North Caucasus through a political project. We have seen within the West and within Ukraine a support for groups in Ingushetia, in Kalmykia, in Chechnya to organize their own claim for independence, as well as some liberation armies that could fight in the near future to establish this project. Russia, at the same time, has instrumentalized the idea of decolonization as a Western-made project to destroy Russia from within, really using this narrative to target activists inside of Russia, but also in Ukraine and in the West. So in that sense, decolonization is taken really as a whole political project. At the same time, decolonization is also reforms, ideas of bringing changes into the political system and the social system in the North Caucasus, even within the Russian Federation. Ability to speak about the tragedies of the past, deportations, the Chechen wars, genocide of many minorities in the North Caucasus throughout the years, decolonizing how we teach history and how Russia has imposed a narrative and have prevented often non-Slavic languages to be taught in the North Caucasus. It is about emancipation of the vertical of power, of the way Moscow has really instrumentalized local elite as a neo-imperial structure. It's about redefining, if Russia is maintained as such, a new federalism, a new social contract, but also, most importantly, addressing overt institutional systemic racism and discrimination against North Caucasians across the Russian Federation. The way they are approached as second-class citizens, biases, racism are all manifestation of imperial and neo-imperial structure. There's a lot to be discussed about the decolonization. It is not only about this idea of disintegration of Russia, and I think it is also to talk about the West and the role the West has to play in fostering discussion and debates about decolonization in Russia. It is about protecting activists on Western soil against transnational repression. It is about supporting activists and reflection of what the North Caucasus post-war Ukraine could look like, but it's also avoiding what was done in the 1990s with Chechnya. Chechnya won their independence. Chechnya established a fair and free election in the 1990s, but the West, after the war, really forgot about Chechnya, forgot about promises about economic development, support, political reforms. And in a way, there's a danger that the end of the war in Ukraine could mean the exact same thing for the North Caucasus and other minorities and nationalities within the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Jean-Francois. Again, incredibly comprehensive response. And I just want to say, when you delimited there, I think you gave 7 or 8. I was trying to write them down, different, understandings of what decolonization is. I hope you have an article on this, or you have one forthcoming, because that was the most comprehensive look I have seen that people know. And that's wonderful, because people tend to assume it means one thing, and you're absolutely right. It means different things to different people at different times. And so that was incredibly well done, the way you broke it down. I actually want to ask you just a quick follow-on question before I return to Murat, because I know your research has looked at both people in the region and the members of the diaspora. And I'm curious if you just even take one of the, the 8 republics there, do you see a difference amongst the diaspora looking at decolonization differently than people who are in the region? Or do you see a commonality in understanding whether it's kind of looking at wanting independence, or does the diaspora look similarly or differently?
I think it is easier for the diaspora to imagine the future and discuss about decolonization as they are, in a way, safe or safer. And they are also not dealing with the structure of oppression on a daily basis. So the diaspora usually has a broader perspective of what a major political change would look like, as local people have the lived experience of structural and institutional racism. For local people, it is more about immediate changes to their life and economic well-being. For the diaspora, it is the safety of their family and this often role of engaging Western government in understanding the challenges that the decolonization of Russia or Imperial Russia would look like, especially for a region that is now discussed in a very limited manner compared to Ukraine, compared to Georgia and former Soviet republics.
Thank you. Murat, I'm going to take a bit of a turn here. As a scholar of authoritarianism in the North Caucasus, could you please discuss the different paths Chechnya might take when Ramzan Kadyrov's rule comes to an end? In other words, how might not only Chechnya, but also the broader North Caucasus region change politically, economically, socially, whichever dimension you want to focus on?
Thank you for the question. Those who've been following the developments in Chechnya and around noticed that around a year ago, news appeared about issues that Ramzan Kadyrov experiences with his health, and that kind of brought to the fore the question about what's after, right? After Kadyrov. And then this question was reinforced recently because it doesn't seem that his health issues are gone. And plus, there was recently a research published by Novaya Gazeta, investigation, big one, and the Novaya Gazeta kind of asserts that Kadyrov will die very soon because of the disease that he cannot, the doctors cannot save him from. So yeah, that's a very relevant question about what's after. To my mind, we have to break down this into 2 levels. So on the federal level, it doesn't change much. So Kadyrov's death or Kadyrov is alive, Chechnya will stay pretty much the same. There will not be insurgency. There will not be anything that could bring very big political changes. So as I said in my recent media contribution, there is a long line of Kadyrovs, not necessarily of the same surname in Chechnya, who will be happy to take over this role and conduct this function for the Kremlin. So on this side, there will be no much changes, neither for the North Caucasus, nor for Russia, nor for the world. However, if we talk about the domestic level of Chechnya, that can have a really big impact, because it doesn't seem that Kadyrov's family will be the one that will rule the republic after his death, unless he survives a little bit longer. Maybe if he lasts like 3-4 years longer and his elder children will be already of age to take over the republic, that might happen. And in this case, there will be no big changes. Whereas if it will be a different person, it means that a different clan, different family, different surname will appear there, and it means the redistribution of wealth, redistribution of what has been already appropriated in a way. So probably, again, as the audience know, all the businesses that exist in Chechnya are kind of controlled by Kadyrov. Kadyrov is a part of the all income that is generated inside the republic. So, and his family, and so his wealth is coming from this source. And whoever will take over, he will of course want all these flows to be redirected to his own pocket, and that might produce some maybe not clashes, maybe something, but it will be definitely redistribution of economic resources. Plus, if we think about a different person, it might be a different personality as well, not necessarily, even if it will be like copy of Kadyrov, the person might give little bit more liberalization in some other fields that Kadyrov would think that did not deserve liberalization. Maybe it will be tightening of the politics. So on this level, there might be some changes that we will be able to observe after Kadyrov's death. In terms of the impact of Kadyrov's death to other North Caucasian republics, I said that to Russia it will not change much. I don't think it will change much in other North Caucasian republics either. So Kadyrov's within Chechnya, Kadyrov's influence is huge, and it is very important. But outside, and talking about North Caucasus especially, it's not that other republics are looking up to Kadyrov, or that Kadyrov death can trigger some kind of changes. There have been issues of Kadyrov's administration with Ingushetia and Dagestan over some territories that has been reshaped, rebordered after the deportation that of the 1944, when the entire Chechen population was sent to Central Asia. But I don't think that the new ruler of Chechnya will somehow be willing to revisit this kind of things. So I do not see that changes in this side either.
No, thank you, Murat. And again, a fascinating answer. And I just want to ask you one quick follow-up question, because I thought in your previous question, or your previous answer to my first question, I thought it was a really interesting comment where you talked about, much of what took place following the Russian-Chechen wars kind of laid the groundwork for how the Russian federal government proceeded thereafter. But and the question I was going to ask you before it seemed that you led to a different answer was that you said, what happens with post-Kadyrov will impact Chechnya, but not necessarily the other republics or even Russia more broadly. So would you say that, I guess just reaffirming, you do think that what happens in Chechnya post-Kadyrov will stay within Chechnya, it won't spread elsewhere in the North Caucasus or even cause instability in Greater Russia?
Yeah, I do not think there will be instability caused by death of Kadyrov, but there might be instability because of other reasons in Chechnya. And if this instability happens, so there are chances that it will spread over to the North Caucasus. So since the collapse of the Soviet Union and after the first Chechen wars, the influence of Chechnya, influence of the wars in Chechnya has been very, very obvious in other republics. There were connections made. There was kind of there were steps towards not unification, but kind of common identity based on Islamism in a way. And these connections are still there. So if instability happens in Chechnya, I believe that it will produce certain effect on the other republics, and those people who are unhappy with the current regime in these republics or on the federal level, they will definitely join the instability in Chechnya, either in their own republics, or they will flock to Chechnya, as it happened during the wars in the 90s. So we can see the insurgency all over the North Caucasus. Plus, if you remember, Jean-Francois mentioned that there are groups of volunteers in Ukraine of different ethnic backgrounds from the North Caucasus. So these groups of volunteers also indicate that there is certain segment of society that will be willing to support the instability or insurgency against the current regime in the republic, or again on the federal level, so against Russian Federation pretty much. So yeah.
Thank you, Murat. No, thank you. Christine, I'll ask one more question, then we'll open up for audience questions. And again, I know some have started coming in. Just a reminder to our audience members, please do feel free to send questions in related to anything we've discussed, or if there's other topics that you'd like our guests to discuss. Christine, my last question for you. So you were in the North Caucasus doing field-based research the summer following the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. While people's reactions to the war were not the subject of the research, I'm wondering if you can tell us what it was like being in the North Caucasus at that time. What were your impressions of your contacts' impressions of the war?
Thank you. Yes. So yes, that is something that is a bit nuanced, of course, because often that was not spoken openly about by contacts. So, this was something that was kind of going on in the background while I was there, looking at tourism, ongoing tourism development. So you did see, though, kind of different opinions coming from different people who are associated with different kind of circles in the North Caucasus, if you will. So I did see, for example, that those were some who were aligned more closely with the teachings of Islam or had more of this Islamic bent actually saw the war as positive because they felt that it would, harden, younger Russian people who have become much too westernized. So that was something that was told to me, that this will actually be good. It's time that, Russian people kind of buckle up, and, they've become too soft. Which was interesting. There was also from the security spheres, local security spheres. Of course, when you're traveling the North Caucasus as a foreigner, you often, even the previous years have to deal with security officials when you're there on the ground. And so they, some of them just, really expressed dismay at the war already. And the fact that already in that region, there were more people who had already died from the war, had been pulled into the military. Of course, that's one issue in the North Caucasus, as having a higher percentage of those who have been conscripted and are pulled into the military, right, than others in, say, Moscow or St. Petersburg or these more urban areas. So that was something that was actually not sitting very well with some people as well. And then, of course, for local business owners who do rely, or did and still do actually rely on contact or communication with, Western countries for their business operations, such, for example, local logistics companies who are located in that region. There are some who are actually, for example, call centers who are running logistics of like trucking companies inside the United States, and who are kind of managing the logistics of that, who are located in that region. They had to temporarily relocate to Turkey, for example, until they figured out how they are going to be able to remain in contact and with financial flows and so forth. So there were different challenges there that was, also kind of, having to be dealt with, right? And then they had to find workarounds before they relocated back to the North Caucasus. So you do have these challenges and different opinions from various types of various spheres within the North Caucasus. Of course, you did also have, the displays of support for the war that you would see, right, in local schools, right? Sort of manifestations, of support, whether or not people actually believe that, is another story, another question. But again, it was something that was not necessarily openly discussed. But it was causing a problem. I mean, it was a challenge. It was, of course, a challenge for many that I met with in the North Caucasus during that time.
No, thank you, Christine. Again, it's just incredible when we think there's, one issue and one response, or you see the multifaceted responses to it that there can be. So
And actually, one follow-up as well, for tourism specifically, this was causing a problem as well, with regards to, of course, the structuring of, attention of, okay, no longer foreign tourists, but then also material, right? So specifically within mountain tourism, right? Mountain climbers, or getting gear even that's largely produced in the West. You suddenly had astronomical prices for, mountaineering gear, that was, because that was no longer accessible. So that is, of course, was another issue specific to tourism.
oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to all three of our guests. In terms of just the topics we covered, I have my own questions, but I will hold them since we have a number of questions that have come in from our audience. So I want to turn to our audience members. First question and again, encourage audience members still to continue to send in your questions, and just please identify your affiliation when doing so. So our first question comes from Dr. Michael Dennis at the University of Texas at Austin. Many observers posit that even in a post-Kadyrov period, the armed resistance has little chance of success in Chechnya. Yet the resistance, operating largely from Ukraine and the diaspora, is stronger and more unified than it has been in years. Moreover, many Chechens in the diaspora now support renewed action to, quote, end the occupation in Chechnya. What would it take for the insurgency to reemerge in Chechnya? And whoever wants to.
I can take this one, and to start with, I think renewing the insurgency within the North Caucasus and particularly Chechnya will be extremely challenging. What would be required is a safe haven that would be connected directly to the North Caucasus, or direct support where organization of the insurgency can be done tactically and operationally. The challenge actually are huge. We see little horizontal development of certain group, as I mentioned, people that are supported from Ukraine indirectly, but a large-scale operation when discussing with militants or former militants. What changed a lot was the change in the political forces in Georgia in 2012. It's really what affected the most the insurgency and its ability to reinvent itself and survive wave of decapitation and reestablish a sustaining network from there. So I think the idea is more that the process of a revolution or an insurgency against the Russian government would come within Western Russia rather than going from Southern Russia.
Thank you. We'll go to the next question.
Yeah, I agree,
Murat, did you
just
want
add
to?
a little bit. Yeah, I agree with Jean-Francois on this. I do not see any possibility for big changes or big insurgency unless something happens inside Russia. So some kind of big structural changes that something maybe to lesser scale, but something similar to the collapse of the Soviet Union that kind of gave a hope for the population. What we can see that there is a certain dissatisfaction within the society. There, people are not happy neither with current regime in Chechnya nor with regime in Russia, and this is obvious. So there is kind of this potential for possible resistance, for insurgency, for revolution, for rising up. But again, people after two wars, there is this exhaustion of this long confrontation, and without certain hope that this step will actually bring results, it's probably little chances that something like that will happen. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Murat. Thank you for adding in. Our next question comes from Jacob Bornasian. Does Russia have more options and greater capability to exert greater control in the North Caucasus region after collaborating with Azerbaijan to exterminate the Armenians from the Republic of Artsakh in 2023 in the South Caucasus?
I think I can try to answer a couple of questions on the way. I think there is a regular question about how the post-colonial North Caucasus would look like with the relationship of Russia having less and less resources in a way to impose its will to the North Caucasus. But at the same time, a couple of questions, and we'll see them more in details, are underlining the very different nature of the different republic and the different nationalities in the North Caucasus. Talking about North Caucasus as a whole in a post-colonial setting is challenging. And I think one of the idea here is we lack in a way imagination of a post-colonial state or post-colonial landscape in the North Caucasus. What would Russia be willing to invest in terms of repression? The answer is probably a lot less than in the past. But local actors will want to hold tight to what they have in a situation where people will expect reform and changes. And I think within the question, there's also the question of how do you reconciliate a relationship between those different parts of the North Caucasus that have a shared goal, challenging Moscow, challenging its repressive grip on the North Caucasus, but at the same time, while voicing their very different and heterogeneous goals, histories, and within structure that are fundamentally Soviet or imperial in a way. The way we understand the North Caucasus have been in a way imposed by the Soviet regime. So from repression to action to recreation, I think there's a lot of homework to be done. And to specifically answer the question, Russia will have to make choices in the upcoming months and years with regard to the North Caucasus. And those choices will be much more difficult than in the past, in the 1990s or the 2000s.
Oh, thank you, Jean-Francois. Christine, Murat, did either of you want to add anything in or? Okay. We'll move to our next question then, because we're getting questions are coming in. We've got a lot of great questions, so I want to get to as many as possible. Next question: how do you each, as researchers, differentiate what Caucasus national leaders want for their titular nations versus the Kremlin agenda to co-opt the geography for Russian state economy? Parentheses, a Monaco type geography for Slavic elite.
I think, we'll go.
No, you go ahead.
Murat, why don't you start and then Jean-Francois can follow?
Okay. So in my research, I kind of look at the overarching idea of what Chechnya is allowed to do. For example, if we're talking about Chechnya, let's say, and the same applies pretty much to all the North Caucasian republics, and not only to other units of the Russian Federation as well that has this ethnic component in them. And in this, we can definitely see that there is certain nationalism if the leader of or if the ruler of the republic is an ethnic belongs to the ethnic group, so they probably would want something to improve. But within the Russian overarching authoritarianism, there is not much that they can do. So if there is a federal country is authoritarian, the small republic cannot be democratic or whatever. So the issue is like on the upper level there, and in this sense, they are restricted in the freedom, even though Chechnya, like differently than other North Caucasian republics, is having much more freedoms, Chechen elite, to operate within the republic rather than others, like bending Russian legislation and laws to what they want. It's still, there is a certain moment that what they cannot do. And this is how pretty much you look at the things.
No, thank you, Marat. Jean-François, did you want to add something on?
No, I think we can, Marat covered it well, and we can move to other questions to give enough time to everybody.
Christine, did you have something you wanted to add in quickly?
Yeah, I
Yes.
would very much concur with Marat on that as well, because, you know, and there was also a question later on about corruption and so forth, but you do then also see, because of these structures, right, local people actually just working with themselves kind of under the radar, right, under these levels, you know, unofficially, informally, to be able to kind of, you know, operate in the ways they would like, or also financially, right? So you do, you know, overarchingly, there is nothing really that can be done, as Marat mentioned, with these structures rigid in place, but there is still, you know, on the ground, there are still mechanisms that local people are using informally. So there is this very informal kind of economy and connections that is taking place. But of course, that doesn't really bubble up into, or, you know, emerge in any sort of larger, you know, take any larger form of change. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next question is from Michael Keyes with the Kennan Institute. Your thoughts, please, on the degree of Middle Eastern governments and unofficial groups, for example, Riyadh, Cairo, the Muslim Brotherhood, penetrating the North Caucasus culturally and religiously, and whether this is sustaining real or potential terrorist groups with political aims counter to Moscow and Washington.
Jeff, would you like? It's kind of more yours.
I think we cannot deny that there is influence from the Middle East within the North Caucasus, but at the same time, not as it was presented in the past as a game changer or as the biggest influence in major societal changes. I think one thing is striking with regard to terrorist group and with those more extremist group is that from the Islamic State, generally of the Caucasus province and the Khorasan province, they have been struggling a lot to recruit and mobilize people. In fact, if you look at a way, discussion about decolonization, discussion about nationalities, about specificities of languages have gained much more traction recently among the North Caucasus and the diaspora than discussion about Muslim Brotherhood or other organization that was discussed in the question. I think the very important things here is, in a way, the North Caucasus at this period where nationalism was replaced with very strong influence of Islamism, if you want to put it very simply. But then we're seeing the opposite. The Islamism is replaced by this moment where specificity linked to nationalities, to historical trajectories become much more important for young people and older generation also. So I think when discussing about this question, in fact, it's the lack thereof compared to the early 2000s or end of the 1990s that is striking.
Just a couple of points to add. So there is a certain movement from the North Caucasus to the Middle East, not only to join like militant groups or to for these kind of reasons, but also to study. So there is Al-Azhar University. There are other places where youth is going willingly to study, and they sometimes bring the new ideas to the North Caucasus, right? And it doesn't mean that these ideas will be widespread. The population of the North Caucasus today, comparing to what was in the 90s, is not that naive as it was back then, and it's not that easy for the Islamists or somebody to spread their ideology anymore. So it's people are taking it with a pinch of salt. On the other hand, we shouldn't forget that that Russian special services used this card very extensively against the North Caucasus. Whenever they wanted to tighten their policies in the North Caucasus, they always would bring the card of Islamism, of Salafism, or as they call it, Wahhabism, in the North Caucasus. So on that, with this idea, it we can see more news about that.
Thank you both very much. Next question I want to go to from Marjorie Mandelson-Balzer of Georgetown University. What are the chances for some loose confederation of North Caucasus peoples? In this sense, could Chechnya's leadership succession reflect on larger issues of Russian Federation power dynamics, despite Murat's cogent dismissal?
Jeff, you go, because I kind of said my idea about
Okay.
it.
I'm naturally pessimistic. I think a lesson from the 1990s underlined that a loose confederation is an amazing project. It brings ideas to the table, but from the confederation in the 1990s to the insurgency structure that used to think as a confederation, the challenge is really to bridging those different views of history, there's different views of this fragmented North Caucasus. And, you know, in a moment where there would be a fragmentation of the Russian Federation, you ask at the same time people to still having to share a new historical path where they have very different perspectives sometimes on questions. Again, it's easier to unite against something than to create something that is functionally as a political project. Confederation in general, or federation, whether it's in Canada, in Europe, even in the United States, it is bound to have different ideas where regional settings are sometimes against each other. So I think it is, in a way, very healthy to have those debates, but when you have to build a social and political cohesiveness in the middle of a war, in the middle of the collapse of a country, it is a recipe sometimes for disaster.
Oh, thank you, Jean-Francois. Anyone else want to, or I know we're nearing the end of time here. Like maybe, Christine, did you want to add on a point, and then we'll try and take one more quick question?
Yeah, briefly as well. I would also
Yeah.
concur with that as well. Also kind of the ways that in which people on the ground, you know, kind of view each other and speak about each other does kind of show that there would be more work to be done in that regard. Also, I do think the kind of intellectual history of Soviet history, right, that has, you know, you have a lot of scholars coming from Moscow down to the North Caucasus to study them, right, and the way they've been written about, kind of, you know, separated on these people and so forth, that has kind of trickled down also into local academia as well. So you do have, you know, scholars of local universities kind of taking the same sort of more imperialist perspective of North Caucasian peoples as kind of, oh, you know, they're all kind of separate. And so you do kind of have that legacy to deal with as well, still also from the intellectual and kind of standpoint of knowledge production. Yeah. In the region. So
Oh, thank you, Christine. And we will realize we're right at the end here. We're going to take one more question, but have to keep the answer pretty short so we can wrap up in the next couple of minutes. Last question will be from Lydia Shuganova, Senior Professor of Practice from Tulane University. The North Caucasus is not a homogeneous region. How are the differences between the Western North Caucasus and the Eastern part of the North Caucasus How will it play out in shaping the future of the region? Are these differences going to affect the decolonization process? The Circassian Republic, for example, are still stuck in the Soviet past in terms of the administrative divisions. Circassians also have the largest and most diverse diaspora, living in a number of different countries. So anyone want to kind of make concluding remarks? Again, and it's true when we talk about diverse regions, right? The North Caucasus is one of the most heterogeneous, linguistically, ethnically, culturally, religiously in the world. So who can kind of summarize for us or touch on this? Maybe the question.
I will just say that I completely agree about the diversity. There is certain difference in between eastern part of the North Caucasus and western part of the North Caucasus, and diaspora plays a big role, even though the diaspora of the eastern part of the North Caucasus is growing as well. So I'm not sure how it will affect the colonization processes, but these differences will definitely play the role in future.
Excellent. Jean-François, Christine, either of you want to add in a final comment or maybe a final comment?
I can do it in 1 minute. I think there is
Okay.
this divide between the west and the east part of the North Caucasus, but there also divide between priorities of different groups. And one example is the lived memories and the lived experience of the deportation makes very crucial debates of what should be put first in a decolonization approach. And as mentioned in questions, certain national groups like Circassian have been fighting to fight those Soviet boundaries or artificial boundaries for years. So when you look at that, this heterogeneous nature is also what is the first priority in decolonization? Is it about language? Is it about rewriting history? Is it about simply being able to live as a collective in a certain way? And put with that issues of territory connected also with the deportation and land redistribution. And you even add more layer of complexity of this heterogeneity of issues, ethnicity, language, and context.
Thank you. Christine, I'll give you the final word in 30 seconds here. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, just to follow up also with what Jean-François just said as well, you do see that specifically with regard to tourism, right? This sort of expectations of ethnic Russian tourists coming to these regions and expecting a certain, display, or expecting, local, for example, Karachay people who I've been studying most to, display themselves in a certain way or to behave in certain ways, and to also feel at liberty to kind of criticize if not, because, they are the tourists coming here. And if something doesn't suit them, so it's a bit of a neocolonial, experience there as well. So I think that within certain regions who are very, who've come to be very reliant on tourism or are looking towards that has to become a discussion as well of, decolonialization and kind of manifesting what is our sort of ideas of this project tourism and also how do we want to portray ourselves as a people and what are our visions for the way we accept or meet and greet and work with tourists who have certain expectations, especially now that there are more Russians in that region, mainly from the centers of Moscow and St. Petersburg and so forth.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're at time. We're a few minutes over time, so we're going to have to end here. I want to thank our three guests, Jean-François Rattel, Murat Ilyasov, and Christine Lejeune, for joining us today and sharing their knowledge on such a diverse array of topics. And I've already asked them if they would be willing to come back several months from now. We can do another discussion, because as we started at the outset, this is part of a region that gets far too little coverage and tends to get too biased of a perspective. So I really appreciate the ideas that people brought here today. I want to thank our audience members as well. I'm sorry, we had so many great questions and still so many that are up here that we weren't able to address. So thank you for your excellent questions. If you have a question that did not get answered that you really would like to have answered, please send it on to me and I will pass it on to our guests. So thank you, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.